want to give you a brief portrait or an introduction to the Master of Divinity degree, the MDiv. This is the main degree for preparing for pastoral ministry in the church. So for professional ordained ministry, or if not ordination, for positions of pastoral leadership that have oversight of congregations or certain kind of ministries in the church. So what does that involve? There are three components to the MDiv. First is academic coursework, right? So these are all the courses that you will be enrolled in for credit, and they will focus on different areas, which I'll say more about in a moment. Part two, though, is outside of the classroom. There are field placements in churches. So phase 1 and phase 2 of field education, and these are, and you can see a video about this to explain a bit more, but essentially it is working a certain number of hours in congregations, overseen by a supervisor, and there's some reflection papers and so on that are accompany this, that you get credit for, so that's to help you prepare to get a sense of what it's like to work as a leader in a church, what are some of the challenges, to get some feedback from a supervisor and some lay people there, and to hone some new skills. Part 3 is sort of a combination of sort of worship skills, but more than that, about working with teams, also your own spirituality, and that is centered around engaging with the community here in a worship setting. So either in the chapel space itself here at Trinity College, or online for worship online. So planning and leading worship as part of a team through the rhythm of your degree. And so do that. Unless you're on your full-time internship, you'll be participating in chapel teams that our chaplain helps organize. So they are the three required components: the academic coursework, the field education, and chapel teams. There are some additional options that you don't have to undertake to complete your MDiv, but you might consider doing. The first one is something I'd recommend you do, even though you don't need it for your degree: clinical pastoral education, which is sort of chaplaincy training in a hospital setting or some other clinical setting, non-church setting, in other words. The reason I highly recommend it is because it's often required by a church for ordination. So if you're not seeking ordination, then maybe you certainly wouldn't need to take that into consideration, although you might value the experience. But if you are seeking ordination, you should find out from your denomination or your diocese or whoever the appropriate church authority is, whether they require you to take clinical pastoral education. Now there's a video you can watch about this where I explain more about this, but this, if you take this, it can be part of your credits, so you get credit for it if you do it. The second option that you might consider doing, and this isn't for everyone, and you don't need to do it, so this is only if you really want to undertake some independent study at a reasonable length, and write an honors thesis. So 12,000 word thesis that you'd have a supervisor for. You would do this in the last third of your degree, so your last year if you're full-time, or your last 10 credits if you're part-time. And you would do this if you wanted to prepare for doctoral studies someday, or you just wanted some time to do some independent research in this area. That would be an option, then you need to apply for permission. It's not a right to do a thesis in the MDiv, but it is something if you're doing well in your coursework and you really want to do this, you could consider undertaking that. And I've got another video on this if you want more about those two things. So these two are things you might consider as part of your MDiv, but you don't necessarily need to do. Okay, what does the course breakdown look like? You can see we have 11 required courses, four field ed courses that are for field education, so both those phases, but plus your chapel participation, all bundled together. You get 4 credits for that. You get some electives in different areas. and you have some open electives where there's no restriction what the content is. So here's one way to look at the MDiv course requirements, and it's by the subdisciplines. So you need to take so many courses in biblical studies, so many courses in church history, so many courses in Christian theology, and so many courses in pastoral studies as part of your MDiv. And that's the particular courses are sometimes unique to Trinity, but you need to have at least 4 in all 4 of these subdisciplines is the Toronto School of Theology regulation. So the shaded colored boxes are required courses where there's a particular course you must take. Right, so studies in Anglican theology, for example, that's if you're an Anglican student, you need to take that. That's a required course. You can see where it's not shaded, you need to take for example, an Old Testament elective and a New Testament elective. We don't tell you what specific course you must take, but you need to take a course in that area. And where I've put a course in red, these are courses that Trinity doesn't actually always teach itself. For example, Foundations of Psychodynamic Theory, just this year we happen not to be teaching. So you need to take an equivalent course to these. So TST, other Toronto School of Theology courses, colleges, they teach a lot of Introduction to New Testament, so you simply need to take one of those. You need to take a course in preaching or homiletics. Homiletics is just another word for the preaching. And I've sent out in my information over the summer what courses would count as equivalent to Foundations of Psychodynamic Theory. So these are the courses you need to take to complete your MDiv, not including, of course, the field education and the chapel participation. Now I'm going to break it down in another way, same kind of courses, but organized not by the subdisciplines, biblical studies and pastoral studies and so on, but another rationale, like what are the purpose of these different courses? Well, bundled at the top, gives you, the in-depth study of the key elements of the Christian faith. Right? So these are sort of like the building blocks of everything else. We all need, besides just being Christians, we all have sort of coming out of sort of traditions of churches or hoping to work in a certain tradition of the church. So what's our denominational identity or Christian roots? So here I've got our Anglican program, but if you're not Anglican, you might have a different denominational equivalent, obviously. Spirituality, emotional and spiritual growth, so spiritual formation, the psychodynamic theory. Courses that focus on community leadership and communication, so life and death in the wilderness, preaching, congregational administration, nuts and bolts, which isn't a required course. It's one I would recommend you consider. Sacraments and liturgy. Mission and public outreach. So ethics and society. I recommend you take a course in mission. You don't have to at this point, but soon we will be requiring students to do that. And at the bottom, you see the practicum, these phase 1 and 2 of field education, as well as the chapel program, and then your electives at the bottom, where you can either specialize or do advanced study, broaden your knowledge in areas you don't know much about, however you choose to use those open electives. So that's another way to look at the template of the MDiv, and these templates will be available on our website very soon if they're not already there. Okay, in terms of the electives, I recommend you use your electives to do some exploring, right? So please consider taking other courses at colleges besides Trinity. And part of our commitment to ecumenism, or to exposure to various branches of Christianity. We don't just study at our own college. Try to fill gaps in your background, things you don't know very much about. You might be very passionate about a certain area of study, whether that's biblical studies or systematic theology or whatever. So you have the chance to also specialize, develop some expertise, and try to stretch yourself. Like, don't just stay, in your comfort zone throughout your MDiv, because as soon as you begin pastoral ministry, no one's going to let you stay in your comfort zone. So get used to stretching yourself. Prepare yourself for being stretched by stretching yourself during your MDiv. And if you're considering future graduate studies, you might consider undertaking a thesis, because you need to demonstrate you've written a thesis at the master's level before you can be accepted to a PhD program. And also, you may consider taking some kind of biblical language, Greek, Hebrew, or Latin, or some other research language like German or French, although we wouldn't give you credit for German or French. We would for a biblical language, because you need to demonstrate you have at least one research language ready to go to be accepted to a PhD program. Okay, so that is the basics of the MDiv. And if you ever have any further questions, you can find more information in our Trinity Divinity website, the TST Basic Degree Handbook, which you can find on the Toronto School of Theology's webpage, or you can also, of course, be in touch with Sydney or myself. All right, thanks everyone.